Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. In today's video, I'm gonna be talking about the filing status. Um, this is a very important topic because we as taxpayers need to understand how to identify our tax status. I understand that we're paying a tax preparer to do our taxes, and that person has a fiduciary responsibility to select the right status. But as taxpayers, it's always good that we learn how to identify it so that we have an understanding as to why a tax status, why we select a certain tax status on a tax return. The second thing that the second reason why it's important is because tax status is one of the 10 most common reasons why people get audited by the IRS. So if you select the wrong tax status on your tax return, chances are the IRS can audit you. You can be selected for an audit on your tax return. So if we can ensure that the right tax return status is there on our tax return, then we avoid the risk of being audited by the IRS. So currently there are 5 filing status, and I will be touching on every one of them so that everyone has an understanding of all. The first one that I'll be talking about is the married filing joint. This status is available to any couple that is married within the tax year or as of the last day of that tax year. So, for example, if you're married on December 31st of that tax year, you're eligible to file married filing joint. The only disadvantage with married filing joint is that if one partner has a tax liability, then both partners equally liable for that tax liability. So if you have a spouse and he or she owes taxes and you're filing joint, you're equally liable for that tax liability. The second status that is available to married folks is married filing separate. In this status, you're identified as being married, but you're filing as single. So the advantage of filing separate is that you're only responsible for your own tax liability. So if your spouse owes tax liability, you're not responsible for his or hers. You're only responsible for your own. So that is the advantage of married filing separate. Third tax status that is there that a person can have is head of household. So the head of household, in order to qualify for the head of household, one, you'll need to be single. Two, you'll need to have a dependent. A dependent can be your mom, dad, aunt, uncle, cousin, niece, nephew, or any other relative that lives with you, with the exception of your parents. So if you have a dependent and they're not your parents, they need to live with you for 6 consecutive months. If they are your parent, then they don't need to live with you. The next requirement in order to qualify for this status is that you need to provide 50% of that dependent support. So whoever your is your dependent, you need to provide 50% of their supportment. Again, in order to qualify for this status, you need to be single, you need to have a dependent. The dependent could be your mom, dad, aunt, uncle, cousin, niece, nephew. They need to live with you for 6 consecutive months, with the exception of your parents. So your parents does not need to live with you. All you need to do is to provide 50% of their support. But every other dependent need to live with you for 6 consecutive months. Well, it is always important when you file this status, or even, in general, as taxpayers, it's always important that we keep proper record. And it's critically more important for this status because if you're filing the head of household status and by chance your tax document come up for audit, the IRS will come back and ask for you to provide documentation that you did have a dependent, that you did provide 50% of their support meant, and any other relevant document that they would need to substantiate your claim that you did have a dependent. So it's critical that as taxpayer, and especially if we're filing ahead of household status, that we maintain proper record. So I would advise everyone that any document that you're using for your tax, um, to file your tax, have a record of it, because chances are you never know when the IRS would come back and audit you, and it's critical that you have the document to support your whatever tax you submitted for that year. And again, for the head of household, if your tax status comes up, or your tax come up for an audit by the IRS, and they request documents to substantiate your claim as a head of household, and you do not have those documents to provide, what would happen is that the IRS would then reevaluate, would then put you back on the single status. So they will remove you from the head of household status. Automatically, you fall as a single status, and everyone knows the single status, you pay more taxes. So what happened is then, if you're dropped from a head of household status to a single status just because you don't have the required documentation to provide to substantiate that claim, you automatically find yourself in a tax deficit. So and depending on how far back they audit you, you could be eligible for tax I'm sorry, interest and penalty. So it's very important that if you're filing the status, and in general, that you keep proper records for tax purposes. You don't want to get caught up in a situation where you're getting audited by the IRS and you don't have documents to support um, whatever you file for that period. So as a head of household, you need to make sure, and in general, again, you need to make sure that you have proper record keeping. The next status is qualified widow. So in order to qualify as a widow, you'll need to have a dependent. How this status work is that if you have a dependent and your spouse dies, so if your spouse die in the tax year, you're entitled to file for that tax year as married filing joint. And for 2 consecutive years after that, you can file as a qualified widow. So in order to qualify for this filing status, you'll need to have a dependent. Um, if you have a dependent and your spouse dies within that tax year, you can file for that year as a married filing joint, and then the next 2 years after that, you file as a qualified widower. In that way, you're having the benefit of being married and for that tax year, and have it's a better status for any widow that has a dependent. So if you do, it's good that you understand how this works. Again, I'm just going to go over it so that everyone has a clear understanding. If you're married, you have a dependent, your spouse died within the year, you're entitled for that year, the year of death, to file as married filing joint, and the 2 consecutive years after that as a qualified widower. The last status that is there is single. So if you don't fall into any of the 4 categories that I've just mentioned, automatically you're filing as a single taxpayer. So those are the 5 status that is there. I hope everyone has some understanding how to be able to identify it, so that when they get their taxes done this year, they can still look at their tax return and be able to determine whether their taxpayer did the right thing on their tax form. So I hope everyone find this video helpful, and I will be posting more videos, so that everyone gets a more understanding of how to read their tax documents, to be able to get an understanding and what information is on their tax document, and things that you need to keep for record keeping, and in general, as educational purposes so that people can understand the whole concept of tax. So until then, I'll see you in the next video.